Tonight, the mothers of the moment, the parents of gun violence victims sharing their heartbreaking stories with lawmakers. One mother details the frantic search for her daughter missing in the school shooting. Another mom telling Congress how she feels about bullet fragments in her son as she cleans his wounds. Their message to other mothers tonight and the critical question, will lawmakers act? Also tonight, the flash flood threat for the tri-state, up to 2 inches of rain possible before the morning drive. And a health alert as summer begins, a woman dying after a tick bite. Tell you what you need to know tonight. An incredible water rescue, how FaceTime helped to save 2 fishermen stranded on a sinking boat. We thank you so much for joining us tonight at 7. I'm Natalie Pascarella. Tonight, parents making passionate calls for action to stop gun violence on our city streets, in our schools, at grocery stores, and even in our homes. The survivors and relatives of gun violence victims testifying on Capitol Hill today as the shootings continue to impact our communities. Among those speaking to lawmakers, 11-year-old Maya Cirillo, who survived the massacre at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. She recounted how she smeared herself with blood from her classmate to escape that shooting. But our children continue to fall victim to gun violence, whether it's a mass shooting or a bullet not meant for them. Today, a 15-year-old girl in St. Albans, Queens, recovering after bullets pierced through her home overnight and hit her leg. Police say she and her family were not the intended target. Our team tracking the shootings across the city all day long. In one of those, a 23-year-old man was hit in the chest in his apartment in the Mott Haven section of the Bronx. The shooter escaping, and police say that he's wearing a FedEx shirt. The shootout's happening right in the middle of the street. Take a look at this one, occurring near 65th Street and Broadway in Woodside, Queens, right in the middle of the day yesterday. An all-out gun battle in that neighborhood. One alleged shooter arrested, the other one on the run tonight. Then a different shootout happening while people were asleep in the Bronx. Police say the shooters fired 13 bullets near Carroll Place and 166th Street last week, but everyone survived there. Today in the Bronx, students marching to put an end to all of those shootings. The kids at University Prep there in Mott Haven, you see in the orange shirts, walking out of school to honor the memory of Anjali Yambo, the 16-year-old student who was gunned down while walking home from school. Now, the trauma of shootings we know can last a lifetime, and tonight we want you to hear directly from 2 mothers whose lives will never be the same. The mothers of victims in Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas, speaking directly to lawmakers, their pain, their grief, and their message for other mothers tonight. The mother of Lexi Rubio, who did not survive the Texas school shooting, walks us through the day that changed her family forever.
On the morning of May 24th, 2022, I dropped Lexi and Julian off at school a little after 7 a.m. My husband and I returned to the campus at 8 a.m. for Julian's award ceremony and again at 10:30 a.m. for Lexi's award ceremony. Lexi received the Good Citizen Award and was also recognized for receiving all A's. At the conclusion of the ceremony, we took photos with her before asking her to pose for a picture with her teacher, Mr. Reyes. That photo, her last photo ever, was taken at approximately 10:54 a.m. To celebrate, we promised to get her ice cream that evening. I told her we loved her and we would pick her up after school. I can still see her walking with us toward the exit. In the reel that keeps scrolling across my memories, she turns her head and smiles back at us to acknowledge my promise. And then we left. I left my daughter at that school, and that decision will haunt me for the rest of my life. We focused on finding Lexi. Bus after bus arrived, but she wasn't on board. We heard there were children at the local hospital, so we drove over to provide her description. She wasn't there. My dad drove an hour and a half to San Antonio to check with the University Hospital. At this point, some part of me must have realized that she was gone. In the midst of chaos, I had the urge to return to Robb. We didn't have our car at this point. Traffic was everywhere. So I ran barefoot with my flimsy sandals in my hand. I ran a mile to the school, my husband with me. We sat outside for a while before it became clear we wouldn't receive an answer from law enforcement on scene. San Antonio firefighter eventually gave us a ride back to the Civic Center, where the district was asking all families who had not been reunited with their children to gather. Soon after, we received the news that our daughter was among the 19 students and 2 teachers that died as a result of gun violence. We don't want you to think of Lexi as just a number. She was intelligent, compassionate, and athletic. She was quiet, shy unless she had a point to make. But she knew she was right. She so often was. She stood her ground. She was firm, direct, voice unwavering. So today, we stand for Lexi, and as her voice, we demand action.
Zaire Mysonne Goodman, my son, or as I like to call him, the kid, was shot and injured by a domestic terrorist on Saturday, May 14, 2022, at the Tops grocery store where he was an employee in a historically Black community on Jefferson Avenue in Buffalo, New York. To the lawmakers who feel that we do not need stricter gun laws, let me paint a picture for you. My son, Zaire, has a hole in the right side of his neck, 2 on his back, and another on his left leg, caused by an exploding bullet from an AR-15. As I clean his wounds, I can feel pieces of that bullet in his back. Shrapnel will be left inside of his body for the rest of his life. Now I want you to picture that exact scenario for one of your children. This should not be your story or mine. As an elected official, it is your duty to draft legislation that protects Zaire and all of the children and citizens in this country. Common sense gun laws are not about your personal feelings or beliefs. You are elected because you have been chosen and are trusted to protect us. But let me say to you here today, I do not feel protected. No citizen needs an AR-15. These weapons are designed to do the most harm in the least amount of time. And on Saturday, May 14th, it took a domestic terrorist just 2 minutes to shoot and kill 10 people and injure 3 others. If after hearing from me and the other people testifying here today does not move you to act on gun laws, I invite you to my home to help me clean Zaire's wounds so that you may see up close the damage that has been caused to my son and to my community.
Somewhere out there, there's a mom listening to our testimony, thinking, I can't even imagine their pain, not knowing that our reality will one day be hers, unless we act now.
Really does break your heart, just gut-wrenching testimony as we're bringing in News 4's Andrew Siff. Andrew, I know you've been following these hearings all day long. I also know New York City Mayor Eric Adams was there as well. What was his message with daily gun violence?
Well, his message was that the NYPD has so far taken 3,000 guns off the streets of New York City this year, and it's barely made a dent. So he's telling lawmakers something has to be done to stem the tide. And it's important to consider that Eric Adams sees himself in Washington as what he calls a credible messenger. Former police officer. He's not part of the defund the police movement. So he doesn't feel like he comes across to Republicans in particular like a typical Democrat. And yet, that's a message that's hard for many lawmakers to swallow.
So hard for them to swallow. We heard this emotional testimony from the survivors, from those mothers of the victims of the shootings. There, the lawmakers. We saw them weeping. Do you think the hearing moved the needle at all to pass any of these the gun reforms?
Probably not, and that's hard to hear. But I mean, there's the political reality. That was the emotional truth. But the political reality is the House then followed up, passed a series of measures that Democrats know will not pass the Senate. The only question is what can pass the Senate. There's a bipartisan negotiation. Senator John Cornyn, Republican from Texas, is involved. From what we've heard, the only thing that might happen is possibly that if an 18 to 21-year-old purchased an assault rifle, for the first time, authorities would be able to consider juvenile history, okay? So if there was a threat that teenager made to a school, you'd then learn about it, and that might function as a new type of background check. Very incremental, but if that happened, Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut would say something is better than nothing, and that is where they're focused right now. At
this point, like you said, something is better than nothing. I know so many folks are watching this so closely. You hear from those mothers, you hear from those families. It can't help but tug at your heartstrings. So, Andrew, we thank you for the in-depth reporting here tonight, your perspective.